Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and today we're going to talk about the Jewish holiday of Purim. Now, Purim may not be on your calendars. I know Hanukkah, a lot of times people know about Hanukkah. If they have a Christmas tree, they have a Hanukkah menorah. It's in the news, it's in the shopping malls, and then people wish you happy Hanukkah. Purim, really, in Jewish idea, is equal to Hanukkah. They call them the minor holidays. I never like saying anything is minor, meaning like secondary and optional. It really isn't that way. But the reason is just because you can go to work. So many times, like on the Sabbath or on people know on Yom Kippur, you don't go to work. But Hanukkah and Purim, you can. It's always interesting on that note why then Hanukkah is more observed than Purim. Is just because it seems like Hanukkah, of course, people would know, comes always in December and around Christmas time. So people would say, well, they got their Christmas and I have my Hanukkah, I have to do something. But Purim comes around March and really doesn't have any secular holiday corresponding to it, so people forget about it. But it's very, very rich holiday, very lively holiday, a fun holiday, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. And if you do know about it, then tell you a little bit of the customs behind it. Well, Purim, first of all, let's talk a little bit historically that we are talking about 2,500 years ago. And there are two temples that were built in Israel. Nowadays, people know from the Western Wall, they know that Jerusalem has their temple, but that's really the remnants of the second temple that was destroyed by the Romans. The first temple, literally 500 years before, was destroyed, was built by Solomon. Let's say where it was built before it was destroyed. It was built by Solomon, but about 400 years after that, it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia. Sometimes you hear about the Hanging Gardens of Babylonia. It was the big Babylonian Empire at that time, and they destroyed the first temple. Well, the Jewish people were led into captivity. Babylonia today is Iraq, but then there's always power shifts, as we know, throughout world history. And the Persians, which is pretty much today Iran, took over Babylonia, and the Jewish people moved with the leading country. It's not for Jewish history right now, but usually the Jewish people have always resided in the major country at that time. And now it was Persia, which, like I said, is modern-day Iran, and that's what they were living. And I'm going to, first of all, give over the custom, maybe then I'll give over the story, but I just want to give you a historical viewpoint of what's really happening. And at that time, the Jewish people, and I want to note this is, again, I want to stick to Purim and not get off in my general historical ideas. I like history and I like teaching it. But I just wanted to know, usually you hear about, for example, people, say for the most part, know about the Holocaust. The Holocaust was in Germany. The Nazis were German. And, oh man, it was bad in Germany. I know about the Holocaust. And that's really not true. That's what I want to bring out. It surely was bad in the Holocaust, but let's say the 1920s, 10 years beforehand, the German Jews were doing very well. And it's interesting, it's obviously when Hitler came to power, things went downhill pretty fast, I know. But beforehand, they were doing well. And that's what I want to bring out, even going back further in history. If you know a little Jewish history, the Spanish Inquisition in the late 1400s. So you say, oh, that was bad, Spanish Inquisition, Spain was bad to the Jews. Yes, it was at that time. Again, same idea. But if you would just actually look beforehand, the hundreds of years, they actually called it the golden era of Spain because there was a lot of Jewish life and a lot of Jewish learning in Spain before the Inquisition. And we can say the same thing in Persia. I'm going to tell you that things went pretty bad with the Haman story, and he's the leading villain of the story. And oh, poor Persia was pretty bad to the Jews. Well, this story is going to show that. But just the historical background before the Purim story really was that the Jewish people were very well off in Persia. It's just, again, when the tyrant came into power, things went downhill, which is interesting. Like I said, I took you through a little bit of thumbnail sketch of Jewish history, but it's interesting that not that always things have to be pretty bad in order to go downhill. Things could be going very well for the Jewish people and then go downhill, almost like falling off a cliff. And that's actually exactly what happened as we're talking about the Megillah. So I wanted to bring out a few things here before we get into the story. That's why I said a few of the customs. On Purim, you read the scroll. People, if they're familiar with the Bible, it's the book of Esther. This says in Hebrew, hold on, Megillah Esther, the scroll of Esther. And if you read a book, it would be the book of Esther. But I'm going to show you what it looks like as a scroll. Because this is, if you go to the synagogue, this is how they read it. They take out some. Now I have just a regular old cardboard. A lot of times people will make it out of silver even. It looks very nice. Now, sometimes also if I said the word Megillah, maybe in Jewish slang, maybe you've heard about it. Oh, he wrote a whole Megillah about it. You use it as like a slang. Megillah means a scroll, literally, but like a whole story. Oh, yeah, I got to tell you the whole Megillah, like the whole story. So that's exactly what it means. Now, I don't know if you can see, but hopefully you see this is the Hebrew writing. Of course, it's read in the temple on Purim, and in the Hebrew, as you see. This is actually the one I use, or my sons sometimes read it. Again, it's without vowels. People know Hebrew, just like the Torah scroll on a normal Sabbath or a holidays. No notes, even though you do sing it with notes, and no vowels. You have to memorize them. So that is not so simple. I mean, just to read a book isn't the hardest thing in the world, but to sing without notes and know it by heart and without vowels is a challenge. So it is pretty big, and it takes about a half hour to 45 minutes to read the Megillah, and that's the Megillah story, and that's the story where I will relate to you. Just wanted to show you, like I said, a few of the customs, a few of the ideas behind the Megillah before we get into the whole story. I'll put this down here. Another interesting idea is, like I just told you, and we're going to read it. I mean, we're going to read it. I'm going to tell it to you by heart. I tell you about the story of the Megillah that Haman was the villain. So there's a custom. It says that you should wipe out your enemies, but you know, no one's beating anybody up, of course. But you wipe them out in name, because sometimes people, as you see that, they stamp their foot when Haman's, or they put on noisemakers. So I brought my little Purim. It says Purim in Hebrew here. You buy these things, or you can buy, obviously these things are generic and they just put a Purim on it. And it's called a grogger. Grogger just means a noisemaker. Simple as that. And that's when every time Haman's name is recited, you know, when there is many times in the Megillah, and Haman went this. I mean, in Hebrew, Haman is in Hebrew. You turn your grogger, you stamp your foot, you stamp your hand, whatever, in order to like wipe out and make noise and get rid of him. Here is just simply that I showed you before, the scroll. This is just a booklet of the same exact thing, but with English translation. Of course, people should know what they're reading. It's always an interesting story, and I will relate the story not only as a dry story, but as a like interesting ideas between the lines. So now let's go. I told you a little bit about the customs. Now let's get into the story. Now this, again, took place about 2,500 years ago, and the story actually takes place with a party. And that the king, whose name is Achashverosh, some people say again, they use Hebrew names, or not, Achashverosh is not Hebrew, but they don't use exact names in the history books. So many times people will say this is Xerxes II, but just don't put your stamp on it, because it's not, there's other historians say it's other people, but usually the consensus, and that's what we say, is Xerxes. And he was a great king, And it said he ruled over 127 countries. Well, that's pretty good. Here we have the Western Hemisphere and China, and there's a few hundred nations in the UN. Here's 127 countries, and it does say from India, which was the known world at that time. They didn't know any, I mean, talking 2,500 years ago, they didn't know from Korea and then the Philippines and things like that, Hawaii. And they went from India on the east to Ethiopia on the west. Of course, we know there's more countries, to say the least, than that. But again, we're talking 2,500 years ago, they didn't discover the world. So that's a lot of countries, 127 countries. And he made an incredible, incredible party. It doesn't give a reason, and that's why I'm filling in over here, why he made the party. Why the king made a party. And this is the reason for the party. And that is just that Jeremiah was a Jewish prophet, prophesied during that first temple while it was still standing. Typically, the Jewish people, you're sinning, you're going to get punished. You know, I mean, that's just a basic theme. You do what's right, you get rewarded. You do what's wrong, you get punished. It's just obviously very, very basic in all over the Jewish history, and really it's in everybody's history. The good guys win out in the end. In any case, he was telling them, you're worshiping idols, you're doing things that are wrong. Because it is, the temple's going to get destroyed. Because even though we said Nebuchadnezzar just didn't fall apart from heaven, there was a real army and a real empire and real fighting, and they destroyed it. But everything has to have a spiritual source, and that was because the Jewish people were sinning. But at the end of his prophecy, he says, stay tuned. I know it's going to be destroyed, and I just told you, I'm prophesizing you're going to be exiled to a foreign land. But he gives a number, 70 years. He says 70 years afterwards, you'll return back home to Israel and rebuild another temple, which would be the second temple. Just very interesting to take it to current events. On a side note, and during the second temple, there was no prophecy like that. So people say, well, when are the Jewish people supposed to return to Israel? Even though they did return to Israel in 1948, there's a state of Israel. The temple surely hasn't been built. It's the same Western Wall there as it was for the last 2,000 years, but there wasn't given a set time. And the first temple, so we're waiting. I mean, it could happen any day. The Jewish people have been hoping for 2,000 years, but we don't know. We don't know any exact date. And the first temple, they did the 70 years. So even though it was a Jewish prophet, I mean, many of the other nations of the world had very, very great respect for Jewish prophets. They had even Nebuchadnezzar had a Jewish prophet, Daniel, in his court. You understand, he's wise, he's a holy man. He wanted him to advise him, and he did. So he says, 70 years, and that means there's going to be a revolution because the Jewish people are going to get up and leave and build a temple. Well, today no one cares. It's a free country. We're United States. No one cares, and there are many thousands do every year from America to emigrate towards Israel. And, you know, free world, free country, and no one cares. Want to leave? Leave. In any case, that wasn't a situation 2,500 years ago. It was like a revolution. Well, because he was a dictator and he owned the world. There's a free world for the most part, and people come and people go, and they go from one country to another. And there, it was taken as a big revolution. Oh, the Jewish people are going to leave, and they're going to rebuild their empire with the second temple. Can't have that. So he was always concerned and worried and anxious. When's the 70 years going to be finished? Finally, to his calculation, to the king Ahasuerus' calculation, 70 years were up. So he says, well, that just shows you the prophecy was wrong, or maybe the Jewish people sinned so much. So it's not going to happen, and that's why he threw the party. Because it was a big party, because he says, the Jewish people are going to be here for good. There's not going to be a revolution. And he was very, very happy. Of course, on the side note, the prophecies were always correct. Jeremiah was 100% correct. So who's right, Ahasuerus or Jeremiah? Jeremiah was right, but each one thought they calculated at a different time. One thought is when the Jewish people were exiled, and one was when the Jewish people the temple was destroyed. They were exiled a few years before the temple was destroyed, and he thought when they were exiled it was the 70 years and not when the temple was destroyed. So the bottom line is just that they were during different calculations. In a way, they were both right. But in any case, Achashverosh thought that the prophecy was true. Was wrong now, wasn't true. And that's the reason, back to the beginning of the Megillah, why he made a party. So he was very happy. He made an incredible, incredible party. Lasted for 180 days. It's a big party. It's not like a Saturday night party for a few hours. Or you see the president makes inauguration for a day, a big day, or 2 days. But in any case, 180 days, because he was a very powerful king, and everybody was invited from all over the world to participate in his, everybody likes. So, like, again, if you would be, I don't know if the mayor is, I shouldn't say, if the mayor of some is invited to the president's inauguration, makes him happy. Oh, I like this kingdom. They're nice to me, and I'm not going to rebel. I'm not going to vote him out because he did me a nice favor. Fine. So he had this big party, and of course the Jewish people were invited also. And the Jewish people actually, again, I'm saying what the book of Esther, if you know it, if you've read it, and then filling in the stories behindhand from the Medrash and the Talmud. So I'm making it even more colorful, but I'm bringing in these other ideas that fill in the story. So the Jewish people who also were invited, and they were given kosher food because a Jewish person needed to eat kosher. And this is fine, everybody gets what they want, and they're going to get kosher food. Now it says in the Gemara, why did the Jewish people have such a harsh decree, which we didn't get into yet, against them? And the answer is just because they enjoyed from the meal of that King Achashverosh. They went to the party. So the question is, well, if it's kosher, why can't you go to a party? So that's not all 100% true. See, King Ahasuerus not only made a party, but he actually, when they destroyed Jerusalem, they took a lot of vestments out of the, in articles out of the temple. Again, big back and forth to current events, that's people are intrigued with Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark. That people say, they're really talking about the Roman Empire, but it's the same articles, that they were talking about that they looted Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant, which was very powerful, it says, is lost somewhere. I've read a good few books on it. It's under the temple, buried there. Some people say it was in Africa. Again, and you have books, and people spend their lives really searching for it. In any case, according to the Talmud, Achashverosh did loot the temple, and they did get these great, great articles that were holy. Now they had respect for the holy articles of the temple. They didn't just use them for anything because they considered them holy. But now that Achashverosh says, the 70 years are up, it's a baloney, the Jewish people are destroyed. You have ancient peoples like the Moabites, the Canaanites, they are mentioned in the Bible, and they're just lost. That's what happens many times. I don't want to say that about, like, even in our country, maybe they're not lost. I know the American Indians, the Native Americans, but slowly but surely, they're surely not as great. And if America was, people would say they're mean enough for putting them on reservations. If they'd be really mean, they'd even wipe them out further. You could see where here's a whole culture. You have the Incas. I'm just saying, in more modern countries, you have cultures that are really wiped, and languages that are really wiped out. So it's not, if on the contrary, it's, you have more like ancient countries are really, to stay intact is really against the norm. So again, it's not wild for Achashverosh to say, yeah, the Jewish people, they're going to assimilate, they're destroyed. Nothing's going to be remain of them. And really it's a different topic, but again, Jewish history, it's a miracle that they've stayed intact. All right, keep rolling. Keep on going with the story because there's so much to tell and I'm limited with time. They have to do this in 2 parts, but stay tuned, as I always say. So in any case, the Jewish people, Achashverosh wore these vestments of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and these were holy things, and they weren't supposed to be just used in any old party. And when the Jewish people saw them, they should have just walked out. It's like you're going to a party to celebrate your defeat. I mean, that's pretty low, really, if you think about it. You know, someone just defeated you, and they make you, you know, they invite you to the party. Come on, celebrate your defeat. So that was actually a very, very low thing, and the Jewish people sat there still enjoying the party at Achashverosh because they didn't want to walk out, they didn't want to snub Achashverosh. So in any case, that's the reason why the Almighty just said, this is terrible. I mean, you have no self-respect as a person to celebrate your own defeat. So in any case, that's why the decree happened. And what happened was, and speeding up the story a little bit, was that everybody, you know, they had a little drink. I said it's a party, so they're drinking wine, and they get a little drunk, and there's, unfortunately, men, you know, they talk about, oh, my wife's more beautiful than yours. And so they said, oh, and Achashverosh said, my wife's the most beautiful of everybody's. He says, oh yeah, let's see, let her parade, you know, it's like a nice party, and a nice party, it's, you know, they're wild, they're drunk. And they said, all right, and her name was Vashti. And this Vashti was an evil queen in her own right, but she was very beautiful. She made the Jewish girls work on the Sabbath. And they asked her to come out and dance. The king wants you to come out and dance and parade her beauty. And she said, you know, really the story was that Vashti was the queen she was really the queen from her relationship. Her grandfather was Nebuchadnezzar. And therefore, she couldn't be the queen like in France. There is a Queen Elizabeth of England, because she is the queen. She's married, but he's not the king. She is the queen. Now in France, for example, obviously they don't have monarchy, we all know nowadays, but even if there was only a girl, then she wasn't the queen, the ruler. She was the queen, and her husband, her husband was the king of France. So here also, even though she was really royalty, her husband became the king. So he says, you know, I'm the real royalty around here. You don't just tell me to go dancing in front of everybody. I'm not coming. Who are you to talk that way to me? I'm not just some slave girl you can tell her to dance in front of you. And he was a little bit drunk, you have to remember. As if I, you know, he snubbed, you know, they says, well, she's not coming. And in front of his friends, and everybody's laughing. He says, what should I do? So Haman, now it comes the Haman part. He says, have her killed, because it's a chutzpah. He didn't say chutzpah, it's a Jewish word. But it's an insult to the king that a queen doesn't come out and dance. So he's drunk. He says, all right, kill her. And what Haman was thinking, that he would get his own daughter in there, and she would turn into the queen. Everything is a political intrigue. And then after a while, he says, well, I'm lonely. You know, after he's done with being drunk like that, he says, oh, man, I miss my queen, you know, and I had her killed. So what should I do? They says, well, make a beauty contest and pick a new queen. It's a good idea. And they pick girls up from all over the world. And, you know, there's different beauties. There's a Japanese good, nice-looking girl and an African nice girl. You know, different types for every person. And so they picked up people from all over, girls from all over the world, and of course they tried to pick up a Jewish girl. And that girl was Esther, and here comes Esther. This is the heroine of the story. The Megillah, like I said, is named after her, and she was brought in. Making a long story short, they were months, I don't know why they need months, but in any case they need months. They have their beauty treatments and perfumes and body lotions, they say. Even in the Megillah, they need months for that. Finally, every person has one day to show themselves, and whoever the king picked was going to be the queen. And lo and behold, even though there's so many girls, Esther is picked as the #1 queen. Now, Mordecai, who was her uncle, was also the Jewish hero of the story, says, listen, there must be, she didn't really want to go be the queen, the king's wife, But like I said, in a way, they picked her up. They knew about her. They had spies, who's the most beautiful girl around here, and they picked her up and brought her. So he says there must be a reason for this. He felt that there's some holy divine reason for it. So he says, just don't say who you are. Don't tell them you're Jewish. So you say you're an orphan girl and you don't know who you are. And that's what she did. And so the king said to Queen Esther, you're the queen, but tell me where you're from. I want to know your family background, who you are. And she wouldn't tell. She wouldn't tell for anything because she was told not to tell. So the thing, life goes on. In the meantime, that this character Haman was turned into the prime minister. And they were all in the court, and he hated the Jewish people terribly. He totally hated, no reason, no one did anything to him, but that's a lot of anti-Semitism. Nobody did it that much to anybody. What did the Jewish person do to Adolf Hitler to make him so hated of the Jewish people? But that's the story there. It's been, like I say, as old as Jewish people, that's anti-Semitism. And he was in the court, but Mordechai, like I said, it's very interesting. Nebuchadnezzar brought in Daniel as an advisor, and this Achashverosh also. As a king, he says, I need a Jewish advisor. He wanted a Jewish person to advise him. He knew that they were very smart, and even prophets, very holy people, so therefore he wanted a Jewish advisor. Now, in the meantime, a little more intrigue, that this Mordechai was sitting in the court, just in the royal courtyard, and he heard two people over talking, and he overheard them. And they said they were going to poison the king. So they were talking in a foreign language, but Mordechai knew all the foreign languages. He was very, very smart. He was on the Jewish high court called the Sanhedrin. So in any case, so therefore he overheard it. So he says, well, someone wants to kill the king. So he reported it. And true enough, they saw, they caught them. They got the FBI out, and they found out that these two couriers or butlers, whatever, were going to poison the king, and obviously they put them to death for trying to kill the king. And it was written in the book of Chronicles that Mordechai the Jew saved the king's life. They didn't give him any reward, but it was written in the books, the Chronicles of the times. So there was a side story in the Megillah. It is a story, and then they go on. And now in the meantime, Haman decides to wipe out the entire Jewish people. Well, he can't. He's the prime minister. He needs the king's permission. So that he goes to the king and says, listen, king, I want to destroy the Jewish people. Now, like I said before, unfortunately, in the Megillah, like I say, when you say this in slang, you say, I can tell you the whole Megillah, the whole story. Well, I'm trying to give you the whole Megillah, but I ran out of time. So we're going to have to call this Megillah Part 1, the story of Purim Story number 1, and then we'll have to tell the Purim Story number 2. Thank you for listening. Keep you good in suspense of what's going to happen with Haman and the Jewish people. And I wish you best. Thank you very much for viewing The Jewish View.
I hope everybody appreciates is that you have to balance all of that. We have